Good morning from Geneva. On behalf of the UNCTAD Secretariat, I would like to welcome you to this webinar on global value chains and the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, prospects and implications for special economic zones. This is the first of a series of dissemination and technical assistance events we are planning this year, and these events are based on the Handbook on Special Economic Zones in Africa towards economic diversification across the continent, produced by the UNCTAD Secretariat with support of the GIZ. We will say more about this in a few minutes. In the context of the dissemination events, further activities will take place during the upcoming months, and the second webinar is only a few weeks ahead, so we will send more information in due course. This webinar will be on mainstreaming the Sustainable Development Goals into investment promotion and investment facilitation with a focus on Africa and SEZ. Another webinar will be held in March and will be conducted in French. In addition to this, we will organize 2 national workshops in March and April, also some regional discussions, and there will be in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, respectively. We will circulate further information, as just said. Now, let me welcome Richard Baldwin, Head of the Investment Research Branch at UNCTAD Division and Investment and Enterprise, and Mr. Jan Miksch, who is from our partner institution, the German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ. He's the lead components of the program support of the AfCFTA. Richard and Jan will say some brief introduction words before we go on with our program. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amelia. It's a great pleasure to say a few words at the start of this workshop today. I heard the program that we have in front of us. As usual, very grateful to our partners and for the financial support of GIZ, and happy to share this virtual podium with Jan at the start of this session. Also grateful to the African Union AfCFTA Secretariat, and of course African Economic Zone Organization for continued collaboration on this. I see we have Professor Andres Rodriguez-Pous, who was the technical expert supporting us throughout this project. Thank you very much. And of course, I would like to mention Amelia, the driving force, Amelia Santos Paulina, driving force behind all of this program. And of course, all our experts today. Welcome. Just a few words. The objective, I think, of today's session is to try to distill some insights from all of our work for the opportunities for special economic zones in Africa that will come from the AfCFTA implementation, specifically related to the attraction of GVC activities, investment in GVC activities, but also, of course, to see the contributions that SEZs can make to GVC development in Africa. So it's a two-sided set of objectives. The meeting itself is extremely timely. We just launched last month our Global Investment Trends Monitor with the latest data on investment, on international investment for 2021. We have seen that the FDI, foreign direct investment recovery, has started, but it is quite slow still in Africa. And if I look at some of the detail, the growth of investment in greenfield investment in industry and global value chains specifically is actually still negative. The number of projects announced last year was still down by about 7% and down 21% in the lowest income countries in Africa. In contrast, investment in infrastructure and especially industrial real estate, including SEZs, is up significantly. So that's a contrast, a very clear contrast. We have more investments in industrial real estate, but that industrial real estate needs to attract GVC activities, and there is still downward pressure on investment in GVC. So we need strategizing. So I think this session is extremely timely from that perspective. Just looking at another publication that we launched just last week, which is a review of progress in investment facilitation. Now, this is in our investment policy monitor, just launched last week, and we've seen that quite a lot of countries are making significant progress on the ground in implementing investment facilitation tools such as information portals for investors, there's the streamlining of administrative procedures for investors, implementation of single windows. So all of this is seeing a lot of progress on the ground, including in Africa. And I think this is a real opportunity also for SEZs, and it's probably worth talking about a little bit also today in the context of the GVC integration. The idea behind regional integration in GVCs is to attract more firms from across the African continent to invest in our zones. Trade and in intra-regional trade and investment in Africa is still relatively low, so there's a real opportunity to move there. But it is exactly those regional firms that are often not the big boys of international investment, but smaller firms that most benefit from investment facilitation activities. So I think this is probably worth discussing a little bit today. If I look at the survey we carried out last year with the African Economic Zone Organization, and I look at the priorities given by SEZ respondents to that survey, you see that fiscal incentives are still top of the list in terms of priority, and investment facilitation activities and measures and tools and trade facilitation tools only appear a little bit later on the list of priorities. And I think this needs to shift also in light of the reforms in international tax that we have coming, where fiscal incentives will
Sorry, Richard, I think you're mute. You're muted.
Have I lost sound? I believe I've lost sound, if that's correct.
Now you're back. Yeah.
I'm back. I'm sorry for that. I must have an unstable connection. I was wrapping up anyway, so thank you very much. I will leave it with these words and pass the floor to Jan Mix for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Welcome, Jan. We are waiting for Jan to connect.
Hello, sorry, I did hear. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now.
My connection seems maybe also a bit. Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Amelia. Yeah, esteemed participants and speakers, dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning and also from Addis. And for me, it's also an honor to be virtually with you here today for this webinar and to welcome to you to this event on global value chains and the SEZs. And SEZs are all a high priority in the work of GIZ. And for this, we are very happy and proud, of course, to welcome you to this event and the series of events, where this one is actually only the first webinar in a series of at least 3, where we can talk about the impact and the design of SEZ based on the handbook that was prepared by UNCTAD. We are very happy that this has been published and is now available, and is out there for discussions. The handbook is filling a gap in the policy design, which has been out there for a while, and especially looks at the design of SEZs and gives recommendations how to design those on the continent to also then fill in the gap with regard to the, the AfCFTA once it is in place. Yeah. Also from our perspective, this discussion comes very timely, as we see that since we have this crisis, the COVID crisis, we see supply chains disrupted, and we see also the supply with raw materials being a bottleneck for production, and that those are still under. So I think this is very timely, and also for the SEZs on the continent, a very good initiative to start rethinking and to take up this initiative. I would like to take this opportunity to provide special thanks to the UNCTAD team around Amelia for this great cooperation during the preparation of the handbook, and of course also for the preparation of the webinar with this great lineup of speakers. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussions today. Also, I would like to commend the AU Commission and the AFC Secretariat for actually taking the initiative to drive forward the discussions on SEZs on the continent. Yeah. With this, I would like already to end and wish everyone a fruitful debate, and kindly invite you to make use of this opportunity to have vivid discussions on the topics. Thank you very much, and back to Amelia.
Many thanks, Ian and Richard. And I just want to pick up on two things that Richard mentioned, and it's important to keep in mind, and this goes to the discussants and all of the participants joining us online, and it's the issue that much of the discussion on GVCs is naturally from the trade angle. It's from the regional integration and trade angle. So the investment discourse, especially as Richard mentioned, and investment facilitation in the context of the protocol of the African Free Trade Agreement is important. And also the downward pressure on investment in productive capacity sectors, which are crucial for. With this, let me introduce Professor Andrés Rodríguez Pous, who is Princesa de Asturias Chair and Professor of Economic Geography at the London School of Economics. Andrés is a reputable scholar with a long-standing experience on development economics, including regional development. After Andrés' presentation, we are glad to have a list of distinguished panelists and experts. Today with us, we have Mr. Ahmed Beni, Secretary General of the African Economic Zones Organization, Mr. Mohamed Ali, Director, Trade in Goods and Competition of the AfCFTA Secretariat. Also, we have a scholar and expert in the region, Professor Lawrence Edwards, who is professor at the School of Economics of the University of Cape Town. And we are glad to have also the practical experience from the business sector. We have Mr. Antonio Enriquez da Silva, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Zona Económica Especial Luanda Bengo in Angola, and special economic zones perspective. And then we have Ms. Anna Tum, who is part of the International Growth Center country team in Rwanda, who will bring the experience of a country that has made important efforts in bringing the, as he said, out of the industrial and investment policy strategies. With this and without further ado, I give the floor to Andrés. Andrés, the floor is yours. You have around 20 minutes before we go into the panel discussions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Amelia, and thank you very much also to Richard and to Jan for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be with all of you here today. And I would like to thank, of course, everyone and the organizations that have made this report viable, that have contributed, especially UNCTAD, GIZ, and the African Union. I'm going to share my screen because I have a PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen in a moment. And the topic today is about the transformations that are happening in Africa as a result of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and how is that going to affect the prospects and challenges for SEZs, especially their insertion into global value chains. What I'm going to start is by highlighting that SEZs have become, in Africa, like virtually everywhere else in the world, a powerful tool for development. There are few types of interventions that have been as popular as SEZs as an instrument for generating greater economic dynamism, for creating employment, for improving links in value chains, for creating new knowledge and increasing productivity. And as you can see, Africa has, especially in the last few years, since fundamentally the 1990s, but mostly since 2010, increased the number of SEZs. So they are widespread across the continent. According to UNCTAD data, we calculated that there were 237 SEZs in the whole continent. I mean, some of them, 56, were under construction, and there are more because there are 203 at least single factory-free ports. So there has been an exponential growth of SEZs, and the aim of this exponential growth, the aim of creating SEZs across the continent has been to try to generate significant benefits for development. And there are two categories of benefits that have been highlighted. First, static benefits, like first and foremost, attraction of FDI, and FDI with a higher technological component that can dynamize the economic fabric of local industries where the SEZs are located. As a result of that, to try to increase exports from African countries and certainly employment generation within the zones. But as important, if not more important than the static benefits, are what are known as the indirect benefits, the benefits that the SEZs might bring to the wider economy of the places where they're located and of the countries and the whole of Africa as a result of this sort of intervention. And the aim is to promote skill development. If you're doing firms with higher technological component, you can improve the skills of local workers and workers that are in firms that interact with the firms within the zones to promote overall industrial upgrading, and as a result of that, to generate significant spillovers and create much greater socioeconomic development. However, in Africa, like everywhere else in the developing and the developed world, SEZs not always have delivered on their promise. Of course, there are exceptions. There are some SEZs in Africa that are doing swimmingly, but on average, there are certain problems in the status quo. For example, there are relatively low environmental, social, and governance standards in many SEZs. There are problems as up to now, many SEZs have relied on low labor cost as the primary draw for attracting investment, and especially in the framework of African trade regionalization, the creation of the African free trade, continental free trade agreement. Many SEZs are still leveraging preferences under trade agreements that do not involve other African countries, but go to non-African countries, and therefore the benefits for the whole of Africa are not what they could be. And on top of that, there are significant threats that many of these SEZs are facing, and that might affect their impact. In the case of sustainable development, there have been a lot of multilateral initiatives aimed to curb this unsustainable practices in some SEZs. But more important for the topic today are the transformations in the new industrial revolution and trade integration. On the one hand, there has been somewhat of an erosion of the value proposition of African SEZs, given the reduced importance of labor costs nowadays in terms of the competitiveness of the firms in SEZs that are looking much more for other aspects, like, for example, skills, technological component, greater complexity, and the like. And also, there has been a rise of regional tensions in terms of competition between SEZs that may have led to a pure waste competition and the loss of overall competitive edge. So this has important implications, because on the whole, what we are seeing is that on top of shifting to a need to shift to greater environmental, social, and governance standards, there's a need for African SEZs, in order to have a much greater impact and participate in global value chains, to have a gradual technological upgrading of their industrial activities, to get entirely into the digital economy, and within the context of trade, to grasp the regional cooperation opportunities that are emerging, both in the form of border and cross-border SEZs, but especially as a result of this really bold attempt by African countries, by the whole of the continent, to integrate trade through the African Continental Trade Agreement. So how does the African Continental Trade Agreement change the rules of the game for SEZs, and what is at stake in order for African SEZs to participate in global value chains, but also value chains that would have a significant impact in terms of socioeconomic development for Africa? And the first thing I have to say is that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement comes on top of what was already a large and complex, perhaps somewhat over-complex web of trade agreements, regional trade agreements within Africa. We had the Agadir Agreement, we have the Agadir Agreement, the Arab Maghreb Union, the Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa, the Common Market of Eastern and Southern Africa, the East African Community, the Economic Community for West African States, and so on. And on top of that, what you have is a much bolder, much more ambitious type of agreement that is coming into, is been put in place, that offers a massive opportunity for SEZs to up their game, a massive opportunity for firms within SEZs to participate into African, and as a result of that, enhance their competitiveness position and therefore participate more in global value chains, and to allow SEZs to overcome the problems that we saw of lack, especially of impact, or relatively lack of impact on the economies of the host countries, the host regions, and have a much bigger impact in terms of employment generation, in terms of dynamizing the local economic and industrial fabric. So the AfCFTA offers significant opportunities. By creating a much bigger market, probably one of the largest integrated markets in terms of population. Hopefully it would be a market that would also be very, very important in terms of overall volume of trade. What this allows is for SEZs to produce higher quality inputs and lower costs, to pool resources, to pool talent, to pool skills, to pool technology that happens across Africa. It also reduces trade costs, which in the African continent were extremely high in the past. In comparison, there was lower trade, the trade was more difficult. There were a lot of factors which were related to from endowment infrastructure, but also to significant trade barriers, tariffs, non-tariff costs that were higher than elsewhere in the world. And it opens a huge market for many African firms, and of course for the firms that are included within the SEZ. And this creates a massive opportunity for not just consolidating regional value chains, but for developing them further and going beyond national borders, going beyond broader regions within Africa, and create not just a true African market, but a market that is integrated with the rest of the world, and where Africa can participate as a protagonist. But on top of that, for every advantage, there's the other side of the coin, and there are threats. And of course, once you open the market, once you create more integration, once you reduce trade costs, there are players that might want to take advantage of that and create situations where you end up in competition, which there's nothing wrong with competition. In fact, should be encouraged, but it's always good when it's growth enhancing. When it's zero sum, or when it can become, in the extreme cases, pure waste, you might end up with a situation when SEZs in one country undercut SEZs in another country, and therefore there's competition that spirals down towards giving more subsidies, financial incentives, as Richard was saying, and not capitalizing on the potential that greater trade integration and participation connections might facilitate in that respect. There has been in Africa an over-reliance on fiscal subsidies, and therefore leading to lower environmental, social and governance standards. And there's always the risk that by opening the continent to trade, that some SEZs might engage in trade triangulation, therefore diverting the potential impact and reducing the benefits that local economies and national economies in Africa can get from the presence of SEZs. If this is the result, if these threats materialize, and let's say they don't, as they have happened in other places, we might end up with a situation in which, as I said, the reputation is deteriorated. So how can we maximize the opportunities and minimize the potential threats? There are things that can be done, both at the level of SEZs and the level of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. In terms of SEZs, the important thing is for African countries to realize, and I think is becoming more common, is one of the main issues that comes again and again in the report, is to try to integrate zones into common regional industrial policies. Zones cannot be the result of standalone policies. They have to be the results of highly integrated, comprehensive industrial policies and development policies in every country and also across the continent. They need to be equipped with the conditions, the firms there, with the information, with let's say, the skilled personnel that has a grasp and maximize the opportunities to participate in this new setting of regional trade. And it's important that they collaborate, that there's a mechanism, not just, I mean, they can collaborate ad hoc, but that their mechanisms are created for SEZs to collectively collaborate through possibly existing organizations as investment destinations in order to avoid that what might be a pernicious pure waste type of competition. And also there's a need to leverage differences in the price of production inputs, especially in terms of capital and labor, through the creation of zones that straddle national borders. That would be the first way to start. In the end, you can go for bolder ambition, for bolder zones, perhaps even connection in countries that are not necessarily share a same border, but starting with border and cross-border zones is always a good point to make sure that the benefits of greater trade integration can be leveraged. But at the level of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, there are other actions that can take place. The first one is to create a level playing field to avoid this sort of pernicious competition and firms within SEZs, but especially SEZs undercutting one another. This would imply, and this is fundamental because the handbook highlights how much African SEZs rely on fiscal incentives. There's a need to harmonize or create the framework to harmonize with rules, with some flexibility, but at least a common framework of fiscal incentives. You cannot just let SEZs, you cannot let regions, you cannot let countries run riot in terms of giving fiscal incentives, because we have seen in other emerging countries that can lead actually to significant, not just loss of opportunity, but also opportunity costs in which you are earmarking resources for investment that would come because of the attractiveness of the African market, but cannot be invested in other areas of development that are also important and would maximize and galvanize the importance of SEZs. You also have to harmonize the behind the border measures. The whole issue of rule of origins. Rules of origin is fundamental. And once you get a clear framework of rule of origins, you can also avoid the problem of what is actually created and what is the contribution of Africa and what comes from outside. And of course, you can, this is not a fixed in stone, it's not rigid, it's not, you can grant, and there's a need to grant temporary exceptions for country-specific circumstances, either depending on the permanent context and economic structure, but also as a result of, for example, natural disasters or specific crises that might affect certain countries and certain zones as a result more than others. This is something that has been done and has been done with significant success in other parts of the emerging world. Regional integration within Southeast Asia has actually contributed to facilitate a much greater level of trade, a much greater dynamism of the firms, and especially for the benefits of firms within SEZs to spill over and to create value chains that are first local, in which the firms in the zones contribute and interact with other firms locally, that are national because they actually go beyond the region in which they are located, that are regional in a global sense, and that include the whole of Southeast Asia, that connect Thailand with Cambodia, with Vietnam, with Laos, and with China, and that allow the firms and the zones to insert themselves in global value chains. So in this respect, it spurs direct, indirect benefits, significant direct benefits, but also, and much more importantly, indirect benefits in surrounding regions, increasing the competitiveness, not just of the firms based in the zones, but of virtually all the firms and much of the industrial fabric in the Mekong region. So how can we conclude from that? That there's a need to have significant concerted efforts to take advantage of this huge opportunity that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement offers, and to make sure that through that, the SEZs can become significant effective tools to attract foreign direct investment, to create jobs, and ideally to lead to a significant upgrade in the local industrial fabrics across the whole of Africa. But in order to do that, we're going to have to make sure that the success of zones is maximized by improving the indigenous conditions. So significant barriers have been human and social capital, have been, for example, limited or restrictive in some cases, legal frameworks, but also to make the most of the exogenous factors that greater trade integration offers, allowing firms within the zones and outside the zones to connect with one another and also to participate in African and in global value chains. In this respect, the AfCFTA offers a fundamental opportunity for SEZs to become catalyst of innovation, to contribute to generate employment, and employment that goes well beyond the boundaries on the zone, fulfilling the objectives that I highlighted at the beginning. But this, and I insist, requires a proactive, concerted effort by governments and local actors, and governments that go beyond the national boundaries, but that imply a very stable and well-functioning channels of African intergovernmental cooperation. That would require, in many ways, to have holistic integrated development policies across the African continent with sustainable sort of goals, more environmental, better environmental, social, and governance standards, and policies that are very much adaptive, that are capable of modifying themselves, that are flexible enough to take on board what might be changes in what is a very dynamic reality. And I've done my 20 minutes, so thank you very much, and look forward to a very lively debate.
Many thanks, Andres, for an excellent hypnosis of the findings of the handbook. You did great in 20 minutes. Before I give the floor to the panelists, I would like to reflect on a couple of issues, as we saw from Andres's presentation, and also as shown in our previous work at UNCTAD. In Africa, SEZs offer many benefits, including a pathway for countries to provide investors with targeted incentives, also streamlined regulations and better infrastructure that might not be possible at an economy-wide level. They have also proved successful in attracting foreign firms and foreign investment, as Richard said earlier, that are for firms that are integrated in GVCs, leading to a stronger manufacturing and to a stronger export performance. But there are challenges as well, as Andres mentioned. So now let's discuss how the AfCFTA can help. Before we start our panel discussions, let me remind our participants that questions can be posed via the chat function. We will direct them to the panelists. Now let's hear from our distinguished discussant and panelists today. And let me start with Mr. Ahmed Benis. Ahmed, as a leader of a regional organization, could you please share some key trends driving African SEZs contribution to GVCs?
Thank you, Amelia. And of course, I'm very pleased to be here with you today. And I'm also taking this opportunity to address special thanks and congratulations to the UNCTAD team, your team, Amelia, and their partners for the organization of these technical sessions on the African SEZ Handbook. I also want to acknowledge those joining us online today. But when it comes to regional value chain and special economic zones, there are areas that require some rethinking. Special economic zones in Africa are considered as one of the main instruments that stimulates economic reforms, promoting FDI and accelerating industrialization across the continent. And as per the African Economic Zones Outlook of last year, there are 203 operational SEZ in the continent and 70 projects that have been announced for completions, and SEZ are located in 47 of the 54 African countries. And over the past 5 years, 60 million jobs have been created and more than $1.6 billion have been invested in development of the SEZ projects in the continent. The African participation in global value chain has primarily been limited to export of raw material. As a result, the African economy have not been able to benefit from its participation in the international trade compared with other regions. While the African region is home to about 17% of the world's population, it only accounts for 2.5% of global trade. And such obvious disparities when it comes to Africa's global economy represent the moving force behind the African SEZ. And they are considered today as one of the main devices to promote export diversification, regional trade, along with accelerating industrial spillover and cluster. African SEZ have also led to an increase in industrial export in many African countries, and the accelerated industrial development strategy across the continent offers a solid framework to strive and adjust SEZ participation into global value chain. Promising success stories abound in many parts in Africa. Many countries have managed to join global value chain in the textile, apparel, food, automotive industries. Botswana, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria has become integrated into global value chain through export of oil and other natural resources. But Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania and Morocco have seen faster global value chain integration, sourcing foreign inputs for their export-oriented businesses. And most of their integration has occurred through the SEZ. In Ethiopia, for instance, the flagship project of Hawassa Industrial Park has attracted international investors in the textile business and the garment, and the country is currently harnessing the opportunities of participating into the textile global value chain to drive sustainable industrialization for the country. Kenya also constitutes a great example with the implementation of the LAPSET project, which is the second transport corridor after the success of the Mombasa special economic zones, linking the Malamo port to Ethiopia and to the other Eastern African countries. And this works in favor of the country's industrialization vision for 2030 and the investment promotion initiatives in infrastructures and more sophisticated supply chain processes. On the same, the Tanzanian government signed off on the implementation of new Kurasini Industrial Park and Business Center last September. On the northern side of the continent, the Tanger Med Zone has been highly commended in strengthening the automotive cluster, which feature today the top car makers Renault, Nissan, and the presence of more than 100 tier 1 and automotive suppliers addressing local and European OEM demand. These are a few illustrations representing the great effort that the African SEZ are making towards integrating the global value chain. This has been said, Africa remains a smaller actor in the global economy, accounting for just 3% of the global trade in intermediate goods. So as the African export tend to enter at the very beginning of the global value chain. Hence, the continent's contribution to global value chain is facing important challenges that needs to be addressed by involving the special economic zones as a driver of policy reforms. And some of the challenges are, of course, the weak infrastructures and the governance model. Second is the lack of reliable planning and incentive scheme designed to support regional value chain integration. Another challenge is the lack of expertise and skill set to address the global value chain requirements. It's also related to the limited trade facilitation reforms and the digital outreach. Insufficient development of logistic corridors and competitiveness, it has also been highlighted by our expert. And finally, it's the limited access to relevant information that translates market intelligence into business opportunities for SEZ operators.
Many thanks, Ahmed. Now let me turn to Mohammed Ali from the AfCFTA Secretariat. Mr. Ali, often in the policy and academic discourse, regional value chains are perceived as playing a more developmental role or having a greater developmental role than global ones. In this context, what role can this continental-wide agreement play to support SEZs to better connect regionally and then to integrate in global value chains?
Thank you so much, Emilia, and again, let me extend that thanks to UNCTAD and GIZ, and welcome all the distinguished panelists and for this very timely and very important event. Update you on the launch of the SEZ guideline. So let me say that we understood that trade itself is not the end game. Trade is a tool for development. We have a very ambitious program as in Africa, which is the African Union Agenda 2063. And the AfCFTA is part of this program. And ultimately, we are aiming in the AfCFTA to the sustainable development. We have in our objective the creation of regional value chain and the industrialization as at the heart of what we are trying to do in the AfCFTA. And you can see that reflected in how we structured the agreement. The agreement itself is not only about the tariff liberalization and tariff elimination, but it is a complete package of tariff elimination in terms of protocol and trading goods, combined with a protocol and trading service and a protocol and investment that complement the effort. So indeed, the creation of value chain, we started from now, we started engagement, we started to have supportive programs aims to the creation of value chains. And we are seeing this example as a true example of how the countries can transform their economies and how they can overcome the usual challenges we have in Africa in terms of cost of production, and that will allow them to compete with outsider competitors, but also to a very effective tool that shift the shape of economy. We have seen that happen in many sectors, in sectors of textile, in wood sector, in many industries where special economic zones made a difference. And indeed, the protocol in trading goods itself have a specific article that recognize the importance role of special economic zone in development. So the AfCFTA is counting on the special economic zones, is counting on the efforts of creating the continental and regional value chain in shaping Africa we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali. In connection to what you have highlighted, this role of inter-regional integration in the context of the global agenda, I would like to ask Professor Edwards, based on your work and your experience in the region, how can the African Continental Free Trade Agreement contribute to harnessing opportunities and ensuring a level playing field for, as I said, in the African context? We heard from Andres that leveling playing field is one of the goals in all this policy discussion and design of SEZs. The floor is yours, Lawrence.
Thank you very much. In fact, many of my comments reflect what's in the handbook and what Prof. Andres has already said. But I wanted to highlight a critical issue about the sustainability and the effectiveness of regional integration schemes. And that is a perception of firms and of governments that the distribution of the gains are fair. As soon as issues arise regarding unfair gains, both at the firm level and at the product level, what we see emerging are tendencies to restrict trade. Now, the EAC, a successful customs union, is a very good reflection of this, and the tensions with regard to the trade in sugar, trade in maize, vegetable oils, dairy products, etc., really reflect some of those tensions. Now, with SEZs, it seems that those are particularly important because the SEZs are firms within SEZs benefit from fiscal incentives, they benefit from infrastructure provided by the state, and these provide firms with competitive advantages over and above other firms in other countries. And so this perception of gains or unfair trade arising from SEZ trade within the AfCFTA could derail or could pose some constraints to cross-border trade and the development of SEZs underpinning regional integration or regional value chains. And so the key, as Prof. Andres has already pointed out, is the danger of fiscal incentives resulting in a race to the bottom. Firm countries may have an incentive to track this foreign FDI by offering these very attractive incentives, but this is a race to the bottom, and that's particularly problematic in that the research has shown that fiscal incentives aren't the driver of sustainable firms or sustainable SEZs. So it's the wrong form of incentive to compete on in that regard. There's another key concern, I think, with regard to the fairness in the distribution of the gains, is that of the permission of SEZ firms to export both locally, to sell out of the zone into the domestic market, but as well as into the regional market. And that raises issues of fairness against other firms or domestic firms that are not in the SEZ zones and their ability to export to the external market. And that can induce unfair competition within markets, both in selling to the domestic markets as well as to selling to the external market. So defining the constraints and the laws that dictate whether SEZ firms can export or under what conditions they're able to export both the domestic and the regional market are really critical. And again, that needs to be somewhat harmonized across countries. Otherwise, this will be perceived as being unfair and could create problems. So I think critical is this harmonization. It's super difficult because SEZs are local laws. The AfCFTA has a regional law. So we need to combine these particular local versus regional spaces. I think there are key elements of harmonization. I think this issue of fiscal harmonization or consolidating fiscal laws, these labor standards, environmental laws, coordinating or harmonizing some of those policies is a critical feature I think the AfCFTA will need to deal with. This doesn't seem to be covered very thoroughly in the AfCFTA documentation, but this is a critical area. I think this issue about the rules of origin, that's a challenge. There's negotiations on the rules of origin and they've been negotiated. If they're too loose, well, it encourages rerouting of goods. If they're too strict, this is going to impede the capacity of SEZs, but as well as other firms from participating in the regional trade agreements as well. So that's a critical issue to harmonize and to discuss and engage. The investment protocols as well, to prevent unfair or excessive competition to attract foreign investment. This is an area that is within the AfCFTA phase 2. That's a negotiation aspect that needs to be dealt with. And I wanted to highlight lastly the area of trade remedies and a proper dispute settlement mechanism. If those systems are not well accepted and recognized by the trading partners, then it becomes very difficult to resolve some of the concerns about competition from SEZs, but as well firms in SEZs, but from other firms as well. So a strong and established institutional framework to enable trade remedies and dispute settlements, I think, is a critical part of the story as well.
Many thanks, Edward, for discussing not only distributional and harmonization issues, but also challenges. Perhaps Andres would like to to react some of the points raised. But before, let me hear some national experience. We have Angola and Rwanda from two different perspectives here today. First, let me ask Mr. Da Silva. As we know, Angola is a member of the Southern African Development Community. In your opinion, how do you think the community, SADC, has supported the integration of Angola in GVCs? And to what extent does it benefit the local economic development? Hello? Yes. Mr. Silva, the floor is yours.
Hello. It seems that I lost you for a minute.
Okay, do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, please. Sorry for that.
Yes. No,
yeah.
I was just setting the stage, saying that Angola is a member. We know that Angola is a member of the Southern African Development Community, and we wanted to hear, in your opinion, how the community, the SADC, has supported the integration of Angola in GVCs, but more importantly, to what extent does it benefit the local economic development and especially the diversification efforts?
Well, thank you very much for this great opportunity to showcase what is actually happening in Angola, how Angola as a country and through the government's reforms and policies, we're managing to let's say, upgrade our economy in the sense of providing a more open market one and with less dependency on the main commodity that Angola has been exporting, the oil. So it's also very key here to bring forward a sort of a macroeconomic scope of what Angola's market is today and how, because of the large population that Angola has, and it makes the country the third largest market in this sub-region. Well, we possess important natural resources, and we are considered, as I said before, the second largest oil producers in sub-Saharan. What's been a global reference also in mining, with great emphasis on diamond production. All of this means that due to the fluctuations of the value of those raw materials, that we need to create a less dependent and more resilient economy through the other opportunities that our country has in different sectors, as like agriculture, construction, tourism. With the conjunction with a young and booming labor force, there is no doubt that we are going to be able to increase the level of FDI attraction into the country, but also to leverage on the privileged location, geostrategic location that Angola has as compared to other landlocked countries in the region like DRC or Zambia or even other countries. Of course, that the scope of this approach is meant specially to put into context the opportunities, let's say the natural opportunities that are there that need to be tied up with the concrete actions, concrete policies, and concrete alignment with other stakeholders that actually operate in the region, like the countries from the SADC group, and together to build up the kind of capacity that we can all profit and take advantage of. In that sense, I would like to say that Angola has been managing to create through the SEZs, like the special economic zone, the kind of rights set up to attract domestic and foreign investment and to promote the national production. And as key factors of that approach, we believe that it's important to do so based on what has been proved as being the best practices in the world, meaning that we don't want to go through a self-learning curve where we learn with our errors, but just to adopt faster what has been proved as efficient. And as an example, a concrete example of that expertise is what we manage as a management of the special economic zone from 2018 up to now, to change the landscape and to change the nature of investors that are coming in our zone and investing. Those numbers are reflected also in the results. since the creation of the special economic zone in 2009 until 2018, the only moment where we noticed that there was a positive impact in the results and being able to pay dividends to the stakeholders, the governments from 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. So meaning that the last 3 years in a row, we managed both to increase the level of variety of manufacturing facilities that are in the country, that are in the SEZs, to also integrate those same activities within the value chains that were mainly based on import definition. So we managed to substitute in a way some of the local imports with local production. Of course, we need to scale up, and in order to scale up, we will have to attract more FDI. And in line with that same need to attract more FDI, we need also to offer services that we consider that are relevant to investors in terms of their expectations and in terms of the quality of those services. This is why we have then introduced a one-stop service that is now been helping to maximize the level of efficiency and to lower the kind of bureaucratic, systematic approach that in the past were much of the holders of the setbacks that we had. Of course, there's always room still to grow, and it's also important to say that that same room that is still there to grow, it's backed up on the recognition that some of the measures that are being in place are being appreciated by renowned international organizations. Let's say like the Fish Index, where Angola GDP growth for 2021 closed at 0.1, following a contraction of 5.1 in 2020. And the economic metrics of growth will close at 2.1 for 2022. This highlights the improved Fish Index rating for Angola this current year, having jumped from CCC to B- with a stable economic outlook. No doubt, showing that investment and business potential that special economic zone are considered a key advocates for. Also, on another perspective, we see that as reported by Transparency International Index, and that Angola's corruption index appeal reached an all-time high in the last quarter of 2020 and maintain a positive growth through 2021. This goes to show that there is a much more friendly and free market for foreign investment. To wrap up, we are being put in place the kind of measures and practices that do promote growth, and if consolidated with the right continuous consistency of those approaches, we are going to be able to consistently grow and better being able to integrate within the region. It's important to integrate within the region because, as we saw, the levels of trade between the countries and within the African continent itself, they're very low as compared to its huge potentials. If we consider the fact that Angola in particular and the continent in total, there is a huge potential in natural resources. There's huge potential in the youth of its main population, of the population, and considering that that same youth could represent for the decades to come a consumer base that will have a continuous growing needs in terms of product consumption. So I do forecast a very bright future if we stick and we are consistent with what we are doing right now. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Da Silva. Obrigada. Now let me hear from Anna Tum from the International Center Rwanda. I know that you are not only working in the Rwanda context, but also in the interregional context as well. So in your experience, Anna, what has been the involvement of SEZs trade or the contribution of SEZs in the context of existing regional economic communities in GVC related trade, both within the region and also globally?
Thank you, Amelia, and also thank you to the panelists for a very interesting discussion so far. So I'll take this chance to highlight work that I've done with 𝘕𝘩𝘢𝘏, where we essentially try to evaluate the participation of sub-Saharan African RECs in global value chains. So looking at regional versus non-regional value chain participation, but also backwards and forwards, depending on how they are feeding into these global or regional value chains. And this work comes out of a body of work that the World Bank did in 2020 around GVCs. But on our side, we decided to do a deeper dive into the experience of sub-Saharan Africa. And the headline message is largely positive. So GVC participation and RVC participation increased over the period. So we're looking at 1990 to 2015. The latest year for which GVC data is available. And this, in comparison to other RECs like Mercosur or ASEAN, is encouraging, but the region still lags behind. We also found that African RECs have tended to participate in mostly non-regional value chains versus regional value chains. And that's a concerning finding, since these regional economic communities, for the most part, are also created to enhance regional trade, and that's not really showing through in the numbers. We also find that African countries and RECs tend to be providers of inputs rather than users of inputs. So they're further down the chain in terms of value chain participation. And this has implications for how much value added benefit African RECs and countries can get out of participating regionally and globally. And again, this contrasts quite starkly with the experience in ASEAN, which has shifted quite heavily towards regional value chains and also as a user of inputs rather than a provider. So to put some hard numbers to this, our research shows that it's really only between 0.5 to 3% of the region's gross exports is related to regional value chains. And this is compared to 17.2% for ASEAN and 4.6% for Mercosur, which is still on the lower end, but the African region still lags behind. And for another sort of set of figures to provide comparison, non-RVC participation is around 20 to 45% of gross exports. So this shows you the sort of potential for improving regional value chain participation. And indeed, the conversations that we've been having here speak quite directly to that. Also in our work, we find or we decide to highlight 3 obstacles that we think are responsible for this lag in the performance of African RECs when it comes to RVCs in particular. So the first one is around just tariffs on imports of intermediates, which tend to be high across the region. And intermediate inputs are essential for export growth and development. And usually when input prices are high, this affects the competitiveness of exports. And certainly in the EAC context, we've seen a lot of misclassifications and inefficiencies in the tariff system, which tends to put a premium on prices of intermediate inputs. So that's one area that I think policy would be particularly useful. The second area is around rules of origin. We've discussed this at quite level of sort of we focused on it quite a bit in this discussion. And it's another area that we've highlighted as well. And then finally, we also look at digital connectivity and trade and services. So overall, I think fragmentation of production across Africa indeed means we need to have seamless borders, and the African Continental Free Trade Area is a great step in that direction. And the conversation that we've also had around special economic zones shows that these tools of industrial policy and development can be exceptionally useful in this case and can help address these challenges that I've outlined. So overall, those are sort of the comments on my side from the research that I've done on this topic. Thank you, Amelia.
Many thanks, Anne, and also thanks for reminding us of the importance of policy coherence here, industrial policy and investment policy as well. Andres, would you like to react to some of the issues before I go back to the discussion, trying to narrow a little bit on the investment angle here?
I think this has been a very enlightening and an excellent set of interventions, and I would say I agree with virtually everything. The topic that has been highlighted, and especially by Ahmed Benis, but also Anatoum at the beginning, is that Africa has got great potential, but it punches well below its weight in terms of its participation in trade. Also, Ahmed Benis highlighted at the beginning that its participation in global value chains are in those parts of the global value chains where you get the lowest value added. And this is something that needs to be improved, because it's a very large market, and it's a market with huge potential, and where that cannot be left just for firms that come from outside. It has to create the opportunities for African firms to develop and to become far more competitive. And it's also a problem that has been that the whole idea that was highlighted by Lawrence Edwards of extreme fragmentation in the African market is not just a question that was also Mohammed Ali and Ahmed Benis highlighted, is lack of skills and needs to improve in skills, which are also necessary virtually everywhere. But the idea that the African market was highly fragmented, that there were, this is Anatoum put it bluntly, that participation by African firms in global value chains was not in connection to other African firms, but it was mainly with outside firms, which also comes from the report as well. This is something that needs to be addressed. And the African Continental Free Trade Agreement represents a huge opportunity, but I think that Lawrence Edwards has put it very, very clearly, that in order to make sure that this works, there's a need to convince that there's going to be a fairness in the system of trade. That is not going to be in the benefit of particular zones or particular firms or particular countries, but the whole continent can benefit from this level of a trade integration. And this implies harmonization, and harmonization that is easier said than done, because the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement organization would have a key role to play, but it has to go beyond that. It has to have a serious commitment by African governments to participate in this collaboration, to create the channels that are not just formal, but also informal, to facilitate that, and to ensure that issues like, for example, the reliance and the over-reliance of African SEZs on fiscal incentives is diminished, that if their fiscal incentives are allowed, that the rules are considered fair, and that the exceptions are agreed beforehand, and also that in terms of conflict, that you have first the mechanisms to avoid conflict, but also that if you get to conflict, you set in place the proper dispute resolution mechanisms that work and are efficient. If you manage to do that, the good thing about increasing trade is that virtually all economists, I mean, there's not many things that economists agree on, but that trade is good for virtually everyone is one of the few things, but you need to realize those benefits. And this is a great opportunity that Africa cannot let by. If with a bit of coordination, a bit of effort, I said it's easier said than done, but there's opportunities. Africa can harness all the, let's say, potential that it has, and make sure that the global value chains that it is going to participate are not just global, they are also African, and African becomes a key player in the global economy. Thank you.
Many thanks, Andres. I am aware that we are a bit over time, but I think we have an excellent lineup here, and I wanted to go back to the speakers. Perhaps if in 1 or 2 minutes we can address some of the core issues raised that I think still need a little bit more of deep diving, and for the benefit also of the questions that were set to us by the participants. So if you can take 1-2 minutes maximum in addressing those questions, everybody will benefit, and we'll try to keep within a reasonable time frame. First, let me call back again on Ahmed. Ahmed, in your opinion, what are the main factors that will foster African SEZs participations in regional and global value chains? This is one of the issues that our participants have been asking.
Yeah, absolutely. But this also brings us to the issue of trade investments and competitiveness, where the Continental Free Trade Area is representing a major opportunity for African SEZ to address the global value chain challenges. This continental agreement created an enormous single market with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion and forecast to boost intra-African trade to reach $16 billion. And this is definitely a compelling event for extending the SEZ activity, creating opportunities for investment, industrializations, and promoting intra-African trade. And the SEZ itself can accordingly be considered as a trigger to accelerate the Africa's industrializations that will enable job creation, economic diversification, involving the private sectors, the public sector, women, youth, and many more. The African SEZ are also entitled to develop effective policies and strategies on trade facilitations, logistic competitiveness, supply chain, supporting the vision of creating the one single African market and this agreement. To turn this vision into a reality, concrete practices and pragmatic actions should be considered by the African SEZ to benefit from the global value chain. And some of them are recommendations that could address the following. First of all, supporting the implementation of the CFTA and the translation of its objectives into concrete action led by the African SEZ in terms of export diversification, again, competitiveness, and go-to-market strategy. Second is fostering the establishment of collaborative framework dedicated to capacity building and expertise sharing, connecting the African SEZ with the global industrial clusters. Third is facilitating access and cooptation of the SEZ leaders and managers into the business communities, the industrial associations, and federations. Fourth is developing a dedicated platform that promotes the best use of the technology and digitizations. And the objective here is to raise awareness about the up-to-date global value chain market intelligence, as well as industrial and sectorial trend, with the aim to identify business opportunities for the African SEZ community. And last but not least, is reconciling the national development priorities in order to develop strong regional alliances and industrial complementarity between the African SEZ. And I think that this technical meeting is definitely a good opportunity to share ideas on what could be done to disseminate the importance of connecting the African SEZ to the global value chains at the era of the CFTA. And the challenge is for all of us to harness a transformative and collaborative thinking that involves the African SEZ in extending their partnership.
Thanks so much, Ahmed. Mr. Ali, one question for you is, what are the key features of the investment protocol of the agreement, and how do you think it will impact SEZ? If you can briefly tell us mostly on the impact.
Yeah, I will be very brief on that, but I want to take this opportunity to comment on the discussion that has been going. I think from trade policy point of view, or for crafting as a regulation or regulating under the AfCFTA, the physical incentives is an issue that we are really interested to have discussion around, and the expected competition. The expected competition from special economic zone is also another area we really interested to have discussion with from regulatory point of view. So maybe consider this as an invitation to have a brainstorming session over these two very important topics, inviting the same brilliant panelists to discuss that more. And I think the AfCFTA will benefit from such discussion a lot. Back to investment, and again, I will be very, very brief. The investment protocol is under negotiation. We have the first draft of the investment protocol already under negotiation between the member states. But however, the key features that I can tell you that we are trying to create investment protocol that is inclusive, investment protocol that tackle the promotion of investment, the facilitation of investment, the protection of investment, and the retention of investment. And of course, the special economic zones is in the heart of what we are trying to do in the investment, because as I said again, the AfCFTA is a complete package. It is not only about eliminating tariffs for goods. Thank you.
Many thanks, and I take your invitation, and I hope when we get together in Ghana, we can also bring more regional discussions around those issues. So, and also in the next activities and webinar. Just quickly, let me turn to Lawrence. And Lawrence, how do you think the implementation of the AfCFTA can contribute to more regionalized special economic zones?
So I think, and first of all, Prof. Andres also spoke about it, is trying to have one consistent or continental-wide free trade area deals with the potential inconsistencies of the RECs. Trying to trade across multiple RECs is hugely problematic, I think, for the establishment of regional value chains. So dealing with that issue is a major benefit of the AfCFTA. It's a big positive contribution. For SEZ firms specifically, I think we've spoken about the importance of rules of origins and the rules regarding the capacity or the constraints for SEZ firms to export to the market. We've spoken a bit about this, but I wanted to highlight two other key issues. The one is the importance of trade facilitation. This is Annex 4 of the trade protocol. And that's super important for small exporters, because when we look at regional trade firms that participate in regional trade agreements, they're often small. And the capacity of those firms to access the more distant remote markets is very difficult if the trade facilitation costs are high, if they are poor trade facilitation. And so I think dealing with that issue is very important, because that will enable the regionalization of trade, of which SEZ firms, I think, are going to be a key player. If one's thinking about focusing that analysis, it's about structuring the SEZs also, and the innovations and incentives or the development plans around the regional trade corridors, because this seems to be an opportunity in which to structure the thinking and focus around SEZs, trade facilitation, transport corridors together in order to try and build these regional trade networks and enable trade both within the region but with externally as well. A final quick point I wanted to highlight is it deals also about the regionalization of SEZs, is it's to ensure that we don't have enclave SEZs, and that's about processes to enable the SEZ firms to link backwards through backward linkages into the regional suppliers and local suppliers. And so some thoughts around doing that, I think, is super important. And there, I think private investors and particularly regional investors are critically important. The South African supermarket chains, which have a network across the country and the continent, can play a role in both building the supply networks within countries. So dealing with private investors and how to build those, I think, is a critical component as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And your point on regional investors take me back to Mr. Da Silva. Mr. Da Silva, as a special economic zone manager, what are the potential challenges that you could face in the context of the agreement, of the continental agreement? And how do you think this continental-wide effort can help to attract investment in GVC-intensive industries? Very brief.
Well, that's a very good question. That's a great question, actually. I mean, one of the biggest challenges is to be able to respond to the high expectations that come with the creation of the free African continental market, meaning there's huge opportunities. How we could, as a country and our special economic zone, take full advantage of those opportunities. Of course, if we consider our current situation where we incorporate more than over 100 companies in different production segments, we are very confident that with the establishment, let's say, of a showroom, where a large one with sophisticated space and available to display the products that we've been already producing right now. And of course, we also want to, due to our strategic location and due to the investments that are already in place in infrastructure that are seeking not only to serve the local market, but also with a view to a lot of countries in the region. So in exporting those raw materials with no value add, that we could consider Angola as an export facility of finished goods, of semi-finished goods. I think those are the kind of challenges that we believe that we can address. But of course, we need to be ready and we need to promote what is happening in the country and the consistency of those events, so that our credibility and capacity to respond to those challenges are at the same level of the expectations that investors compare ourselves with other geographies, even within our continent.
Many thanks, Antonio. And now finally, let's hear about Rwanda's experience. Anna, how do you think Rwanda can benefit from the success of Kigali, a special economic zone, and the upcoming implementation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement?
Thanks, Amelia. So I believe the report highlighted just how important SEZs have been for and policy. It's been central to them improving on higher value added exports and also in attracting foreign direct investment, both for domestic production, but also for exports. And in Rwanda, SEZs, similar to other countries, they exist in this ecosystem together with the country's investment promotion policy, with their investment code, as well as other national and domestic sort of development policies. And we did a study in 2017 trying to measure the impacts of SEZs in the Rwanda context. And we found out that firms in SEZs were responsible for around 10% of exports in the study period that we saw. And we expect that this is higher in sort of 5 years later. And we plan on doing an updated study of that to see if there are any more insights into the performance of SEZs in Rwanda. But certainly from our research and also in talking with firms in SEZs, you find out that a lot of the benefits that they've received from locating in these SEZs are around cheaper inputs, trade facilitation, like Lawrence mentioned, also just critical investor aftercare services we've seen are very important in enhancing the performance of firms in special economic zones. And I think all of these sort of packaged features of SEZs would be very important in Rwanda taking advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, specifically, I think in relation to the Continental Free Trade Area, and Lawrence mentioned this, but I want to highlight just the importance of coordinating SEZ policy under the Continental Free Trade Area. I mean, without a clear understanding of how firms in SEZs can compete continentally, I think there's going to be a bit of hesitancy and definitely probably skepticism around how the Continental Free Trade Area will benefit firms. So for example, in the EAC, there's a policy around what percentage of exports firms are allowed to sell domestically if they're located in a special economic zone. And currently that's around 20%. And I know the private sector has been trying to increase that threshold. So certainly coordinating across the AfCFTA would be important. I think export promotion would also be essential, and just the openness of other African countries to receiving export promotion activities from their neighbors would be important. I think definitely the threat of competition might prove challenging to this point that I'm making, but that would essentially be one of the big points and drivers of success, in my opinion. I think also firms and sort of governments that are investing in SEZs should remain flexible. This was mentioned in the report, and Andres touched on it as well. Flexible in terms of the sort of firms that are allowed to locate in SEZs, and I think this will definitely spread the gains of the continental free trade area across different types of firms, and would definitely be essential. And finally, I think if Rwanda wants to reap the benefits of the continental free trade area sort of under its SEZ policy, just understanding how they can effectively attract FDI would be very important. And attracting FDI in relation to other sort of country contexts that are also equally attractive and provide an environment of competition around FDI. And I think that falls on the Rwandan government to really think about its strategy around investment promotion, SEZ, and in the broader sort of context of their continental free trade area. So definitely policy coherence and a lot of policy discussions across different stakeholders will really set the foundation for Rwanda's success in this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anna. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Fortunately, locally, we have other events, both online and also at the national level. So we took notes of all the issues raised in the discussion, all the questions raised, and we will aim to continue the conversation. Today, we try to highlight the challenges, the benefits, especially in the context of unprecedented continental-wide effort that the AfCFTA represents. Let me thank again all the panelists, for your discussions, your engagement, and the new insights, very good highlights and very good punchlines. Also, thanks again to Andres for walking with us along this process, and we look forward to the future events. Finally, let me thank my team in Geneva, to 𝘈𝘀𝘍𝑜 and to Berna Dogan and to Katia View, and also to Richard for supporting us, and to the team GIZ in Addis, to Jan, to Ode, and to 𝘱𝑗𝘎𝑎. So we will keep you posted. Please look at our websites and broadcast, and we will continue the conversation. Thanks again. The handbook is online. You have it on the invitation. The French version is going to be published now in March, but the overview in French is already out there for those interested. Thank you very much, and I give you a virtual clap. And thanks again to all participating. Thank you so much, and very nice to meet the newcomers to this network. Have a nice day, and thanks again from Geneva.